Hello and thank you for joining me today. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be doing Inktense blocks and we're doing a little hummingbird. Now today's been one of those days when quite a few things have gone wrong. My drawing hasn't been up to scratch. I think sometimes you have days where you're perhaps a little bit tired, things don't just quite work out. And I thought this was a good idea to use this video that hasn't just gone to plan to show you some of the mistakes that you can make using Inktense. So really the problem for me is because I'm used to watercolour and used to working with watercolours, I tend to approach other mediums in the same way because I've got those techniques in my mind and I sort of do them automatically. And really we need to develop new techniques for different media. So with the Inktense, it dries completely differently to the watercolour. So you'll see to begin with I do a background and I go straight onto dry paper with the wet Inktense. And then my idea was to blend the colours together, wet in wet on the paper. It's been drying quite quickly, partly because of the weather and partly because I really should have wet that paper first. But with the watercolour you get things like the cauliflowers that we've talked about before when they're drying, mistakes like that. But with the Inktense, the way that they dry, if you're not careful, is they're very blotchy. So you'll see that background dries quite blotchy because the paper's dry and I've gone on and things are drying very quickly. And the trouble with it is that the lower layers of Inktense, once they're dry, they're permanent, and when you put the upper layers on, you'll see as I go further along in the video, those blotchy marks still sort of show through. So really I need to practice blending the colours together with the Inktense. So next time I would wet the paper first, and the other thing that I would do was have plenty of each colour made up in advance, not mix as I go along. This is a bad habit that I'm in, is mixing my colours with my watercolours as I go along. And I've been trying to do this with the Inktense as well, with this background that I was doing, and it just really didn't work because things were drying quickly and it was going very blotchy. So like the watercolour, you probably want your consistency to be the same with all your colours if you want to blend them together. But you know, you can really see what a mess that background is, and even with subsequent layers over the top, you'll see that shows through because they're transparent. So another thing really when I was working on this background was trying, when you've made a mistake, to soften the edge off like you would do with watercolour using a damp brush. That really doesn't work either. You put a damp brush next to the edge of your Inktense to soften it off, and you tend to, if it's still slightly damp, you tend to lift the other colour a little bit and make a white mark, so you can see all those lighter coloured marks on there where there's been more water introduced, where it hasn't quite worked out. So have a practice with them, have a practice at blending wet in wet. They're not just as easy as they are with watercolour. Like I say, it's the habits that I've got into, a way of using things. So I'm trying to think what else I was going to tell you about the background. Really, I mean, the good thing about Inktense is you can build on top of them, but then again you've got to be careful that you don't end up with very muddy colours if you keep doing that. One way to get the light back, I've got the set of 24 and there's a really lovely bright yellow. It looks like a cadmium, I'm not quite sure of the name of it, I've got them written down somewhere, but the bright yellow, if you put it on top of the other colours it still really shines out, so that's a good way of getting a bit of light back if you've gone a bit on the muddy side. Okay, so when we're going to do the actual bird, I mean, like I said, my drawing isn't terrific. The tail part should have been a little bit more upright if you look at the actual photograph that I began with. The photograph itself you'll be able to find on pixabay.com if you just pop hummingbird into the search bar there on pixabay.com. You'll be able to find this reference photo if you did want to work from it, but there's also lots more hummingbirds as well because it's a nice bird to draw because it's got such lovely colours. So that's the other thing about the Inktense with the colours. I've used these colours all straight from the pans. I haven't mixed the colours with any other colours to get what I wanted because they've got such lovely colours in them to begin with. I do occasionally mix them, but not very often. I tend to use the colours just as they are. If you were going to mix your colours similar to with your watercolours, don't mix more than 2 or 3 because that way you will end up with muddy colours as well. So when I go on to paint the bird itself, you'll see I got quite frustrated as I went along. Like I say, probably not in the mood for it today and things were just not working, hadn't put enough thought into it. So I began painting and I had mixed the colours with some water, but probably too much water. and to me the colours weren't vibrant enough, because the whole point of Inktense is you've got these lovely vibrant colours. So when I started just applying the colours with the brush, I got to the point where I thought, you know, I've really not got the depth of colour and the movement and the form that I wanted. So I went then just to using the sticks, the Inktense blocks as they are. But what I did, what you can't see because it was off camera, I didn't use those dry. I dipped them into my water. Now this means you end up with very messy hands, it means you end up with messy blocks, but it's very expressive and a good way of working with them. So I much prefer this way than trying to use them like the watercolour, trying to blend them together. So you can use them either like an acrylic, really, in a way where you're blocking in colours, painting one colour at a time, or you can use them for drawing and getting that form. I wouldn't necessarily use them for the wet in wet watercolour techniques like you would want in the background. For that I would stick to my watercolours. Okay, so, and then you'll see right at the end I used some chalk and some charcoal, basically because I felt I'd lost a lot of form. I ended up making the bird too fat as well, so I tried to get a little bit of that form back and just to get a bit of line and life into it as well, really. So you can use the white Inktense. When you put the white Inktense on top, it will look transparent when it's wet, but when it dries back to white. But I like using chalk. If I find it a little bit more expressive, you can get some lining with it and things. So if you put plenty of pressure on your chalk. The trouble with that is, and with your charcoal as well, it's difficult to get off once it's there. You can smudge it away a little bit, but you've got to be quite confident with your drawing when you're putting those on. Okay, so I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to tell you about the Inktense. Really, I've used them quite a bit. They're great for layering up. Like I said, the layer underneath is permanent, so you can come back and put some darker colours on top. If you don't like an area, you can cover it up. But of course, if we're working in mixed media like I often do, you can use other media to cover it up as well. So they're great fun, they're very vibrant. They're also nice to use. You'll see, like I say, I've dipped them in the water to use them, but when I am drawing with them, one or two as I'm going along, because I'm sort of carried away with the drawing, they are drying out a little bit, and then you get more of a textured line, so that gives you a bit of variety of line in your picture as well. If you've got some more where it's wet and then somewhere it's dry, you're getting that variety and contrast into your painting. Okay, and you can always come in with your brush with some water on afterwards and blend those lines if you don't like them as well. So I think that's probably everything I wanted to tell you about them, but really the main thing was just to be aware, like me, if you have been used to using one media, when you go on to something else, to adjust your techniques and really think about what works for those and practice with them. Use them over again until you get used to how they react. The other thing with them is, because especially when you use them like I did, picking them up as a block, you can get quite a depth of paint, or Inktense should I say, and so that takes a lot longer to dry than your watercolours would. So then when you come back on with something else on top, you'll find it looks dry, but it isn't necessarily dry. And you'll see when I did the feet, I think initially I used just a little bit of water with the dark colour to do the feet, but because it was still the paper itself was still damp, even though it looked wet, dry, those feet sort of blended out. And although the colours don't fade in the same way that watercolours fade, they do sort of move out into the water, so that you lose that crisp line if you've painted with them and it's still damp. So when you get all these layers on top of each other and you're working quite quickly, you will find it takes a while to dry out. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. I'll be back with you again soon with another video, probably on watercolour or another Inktense brush or something like that. But if there's anything that you particularly want me to do, if you want to pop that in the comments below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.